Welcome to the clubhouse. My name is Alice, and I'm so glad that you've joined us today. Look, y'all, I'm not afraid to say it. I'm officially old. At least old by the standards of my youthful ideas that train hopping is fun, or that the best times happen after midnight. But I'm feeling especially old now because I'm seeing all these younger people wearing Doc Martens and hanging woven textile pieces proudly on their bedroom walls. It's not that I think there's anything wrong with either of those things. I used to rock some airwear back in the day. Since I'm apparently so in touch with the aesthetic and footwear decisions of today's hippest and coolest, I thought I could share all the best ways, or at least my ways, to make a super outdated but somehow and gratifyingly now back in style wall hanging. I'm of course talking about circle loom weaving. Now, these honeys are pretty much like giant coasters or trivets. I like to really get crazy with the textures and the tassels and then leave it on the hoop for hanging. Alrighty then, are you ready for some fun? Now, you're gonna need to dig around in your bins, closets, and duffels for this stuff right here. So you're gonna need an embroidery hoop, some cotton thread. I like to use this, a variety of yarns, large-eyed plastic needle, and scissors. All right, now we're gonna separate the two circles of our hoop. We're gonna use the inner hoop for our loom. And you can save this outer bit for framing when you're done, or you can even use it to make a second weaving. So I'm just gonna put that to the side. Now, warping this loom can be a little tricky. This is frankly the toughest part of this project. It's not really that hard, but the first time doing this may not come out great. Just unstring your loom and try it again. So what I have here, I've taken my sturdy cotton thread and I've wrapped it around a little piece of cardboard, tucking that end tail in. This really helps keep it tidy and makes this a little easier. Using it straight off the bundle like this is just an added layer of frustration you don't need. So we're gonna start by taking one end of that cotton thread. I'm gonna wrap it around my hoop twice, leaving myself a 3-inch tail. And I'm gonna make a little knot. So I'm gonna tie that like I would tie my shoelaces once. That's called an overhand knot. And then I'm gonna do it a second time. And again, I've left a little tail because we're gonna use that later. All right, so try to visualize this warping motion while you're doing it as making a figure 8, right? Doing this while you work kind of makes it easier, I found. All right, we've started at the top. I'm gonna come to the bottom, and now I'm going to go over my hoop. I'm gonna come back to the top, under the thread in the middle, and then over the hoop on the other side. And I've left about 1 inch between. Now I'm gonna come under those middle threads, coming to the opposite side by about 1 inch, and I've gone over. You see the pattern emerging? So I'm gonna use my thumb to hold that taut. You don't need to pull it super tight, y'all. We don't want to distort these hoops, but you do want it to be snug. So I've gone under my center threads, back over the hoop on the other side. Let me turn that a little. I'm holding it with my thumb. So I'm going under those middle threads, over the edge of the hoop, grab that with my thumb, back under the hoop, under the threads, and then over the hoop on the other side. All right, so we've gone under. We're gonna go over, hold that with our thumb. So under the center, over the side, hold it with your thumb, under those threads, hold it with your thumb. I'm going to come back to the top. I'm going under those center threads, a little awkward, over the top of the hoop, hold it with my thumb. We're almost done here. Now we want to make sure that we have an odd number. So this weaving won't work if you have an even number. All right, so still going under those center threads, over the hoop, under those center threads. Now, I'm not exactly sure where I'm coming in and out here. Let's scoot those over to make a spot. I think that we're almost ready here for our last bit. So I've gone over. My last one is going to come and connect to that first one that we had. So what I want to do, I'm going to hold it here for a second and I'm going to count how many warp threads I have. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17. Perfect. So on a larger loom I'm using today, I usually get about 21. This little hoop, I usually do at 19, but we're just gonna stop here. Now our last step before we tie is we want to snug all these bits into the center. This was my last place here where my thumb is, and I'm gonna bring my thread up on this side, and then I'm gonna push it down on the opposite side. So I've come across it this way. I'm gonna pull it tight and see what I've grabbed. So it's pretty close, it's looking pretty good. Now I'm gonna come up here and pull it tight again. That looks marvelous. So what you want to happen at the end is to have this nice wheel inside of your spokes. So I'm gonna give everything a quick little tidy because I like for those warp threads to be equidistant. So as much as you can, just sort of scoot them around a little bit. Right? That is good enough for TV. So now what I'm going to do is I am lined up with my original starting place. I just gave it a little snip, and I'm going to make sure that that's pulled tight because I want to keep that pretty little circle in the center. And I'm going to tie it once and a second time. It just takes a little bit of practice. And again, my first couple did not look this pretty, and it's no big deal. You just snip it off and try again. And then I'm ready to start weaving. So I have a wide variety of stuff here to choose from. I love using different textures. I have some things that are shiny and sparkly, some things that are kind of furry. I even have some roving, which is really fun to play with. You can use plastic bags, you could use strips of fabric. Really, the world is your oyster. To start though, I like to use a thinner yarn in the center because I think the little spokes wagon wheel that's created in the center when you weave with a thin yarn to start is really pretty cool. So I'm going to use just some of this pretty turquoise yarn. I've got my needle here, my fat-eyed needle, so that's really easy to thread. It's just a plastic needle. And I cut about 4 feet of this. I don't like to use a real long length of yarn. I'll tell you what, guys, it gets tangled super easy when it's long. So if you haven't woven before, the basic pattern is we're gonna go over a warp thread and then under a warp thread. Over, under, all the way around. You can find more detailed instructions on weaving in our mug rugs video. So I'm going to start by just coming up, it's arbitrary, wherever you'd like. I'm going to start here, and I'm leaving myself a little tail underneath. I'm going to kind of hang on to that. Now I'm going to go under the next one, over, under, over, under, over. Now we had talked about earlier that we're treating each of these pairs of warp threads as a single warp thread. So I'm going over and under each pair. I'm going to do 4 to 6, and then I'm going to pull that in snug, like so. Now my last one here, I went over, so I'm getting ready to go under, over, under. Now you might notice I'm working kind of close to the edge of the hoop. It's just easier to get the needle in when you're working further out, and then I'll pull it and then kind of snug it in. So you can start to see that cool little pattern emerge. So over, under, over, under. So we've gone a couple. I'm going to pull it through. Oh, there's my tail. Don't want that to get caught up. And then I'm going to pull it in snug into the center. Now, so we can see here, my last thread went over, so I'm set up to go under. You just want to make sure as you're working that you continue your pattern of over, under. Pulling through and then pulling that snug. If you get lost, or you put this down, you walk away, you come back at it tomorrow, and you're not sure where you are, you can always take a look. The warp thread either right at the end of your work, and whether you're going over or under, or you can look at the one right below. So when we're looking at this, right here I have an under thread. You always want to be doing the opposite in the next row. So if in the row below you went under, the next row you're going to go over. Now, sometimes you will just get off track. It's really not a big deal, y'all. You won't even notice it in your finished product. So you might have 2 or 3 that don't line up properly. But if you have an odd number of warps, in the end, it will all come out in the wash. You'll come back to your pattern. So we're just going to keep going around until we like the look of this. Again, I love this wagon wheel that's formed with the thin yarns in the beginning. So I might work until I have about 1/4's worth of that. So here we are, just again, we're going to go under and over. And you don't need to use this needle if you don't want to. I find in the beginning it really helps me to use that. But as we transition and the warps start to get wider apart, I will abandon the needle and just use the yarn and my fingers. So y'all, I'm feeling pretty good about that. I think I'm going to let that be that. So now I'm going to just trim that. I'm going to leave myself a little tail, give that a snip, and I'm going to choose the next thing. So I have this super fun tinsel yarn. And I think what I'm going to do with this, because it's actually a pretty thin yarn, is I'm going to double it up. And that's a real fun technique. Doubling up your yarn is actually going to do 2 things for you. One, it'll make the weaving go faster because you're making the yarn thicker. The other thing you can do is choose 2 different kinds of yarn. So I could use this furry instead with the blue, and then I might give it a little twist before I start, and then I've made this whole new yarn that is all my own. If a yarn is really thin, I might even find myself tripling it up. This yarn isn't particularly thin. So you see I've got a double, and I'm still, since I'm early on in the weaving here, I am going to put that back in a needle because that's just easy to handle. And I'm going to do exactly what I had been doing before. Now, the fun of this, or the ease of this technique, is we don't actually have to knot anything anywhere. But what I am going to do is tie a knot just loosely in my 2 original pieces, the 2 ends of the yarn. That gets them out of the way. So you can start wherever you want. If you can't figure out exactly where you left off, really doesn't matter, y'all. So I'm just going to come up right here. What I do want to make sure, though, is if I'm going under in the row below, that I go over in the next row. The last row of blue went under. This one, my first here, is going to go over. And I'm just going to continue in that pattern that we've established. Very simple. Over a warp, under a warp, over a warp, under a warp. I'm going to do 4 or 5, and then I'm going to pull that through. Now when I'm working with textured stuff, I might play a little bit with the textures to make sure that that fun fake fur comes to the top of my weaving. So it looks like my next one is over then under. And it looks like what I was talking about before briefly has happened to me. I'm a little off track with my over-unders. They're lining up instead of being opposite. But once I get all the way around this round, that should work itself out. So again, over-under, pulling snug, pulling towards the center, and then just making sure that fun faux fur is coming to the front. This is really an exciting yarn, y'all. My mom sent me this in the mail. I'm not sure what her original intentions were for it, but I'm pretty stoked about it. All right, so when you decide you're done with that, we're gonna do the same thing we did before. I'm just gonna pull that to the back. I'm going to give it a little snip, and I'm not trying to cut these real short yet. You can come back and tidy later, and I might tie that to the closest little tail that I can find. And again, I'm not making a tight knot. I'm just making a little knot to keep these hanging and out of my way. So now we have this real fun eye happening here, and I think what I want to do is try something a little thicker. So as you work with the thicker yarns, what's going to happen is you'll start to build a lot faster. And if you don't have something that's real thick to work with, oh look, ta-da, I'm a little further along. But you can double up those thin yarns and that will also help you move faster. So again, I'm gonna take, 4 or 5 feet of this. Now with this fun fur, it's a little bit hard for me to tell if I'm going over or under. So I'm just gonna pick. We'll go over here. Now I'm gonna let go of that needle because this is pretty big. But I am gonna sort of wrap that into a little ball around my fingers to make it easier to deal with. All right, so again, with our under over, this purple is so soft. And I love that nubby texture. Very fun to work with. And a cool color. So over, under, and remember, you don't want to go all the way around before you pull it snug to your weaving. It can tangle, and this is supposed to be relaxing, so anything that's gonna cause you trouble, we want to eliminate, right? So I'll do a couple and then pull it in snug. Now I think it's going to take twice around before I really see this purple because my original black faux fur there is so fluffy. But you'll start to see that depth emerge. Now the amount that you pull your yarn tight is really up to you. If you want to remove your weaving when you're done, you'll want to be careful that you're not pulling it super snug as you go around, because when you remove it from your loom, it'll warp like a bowl. But if you're going to leave it on your loom, you can go ahead and pull as tight or leave it as loose as you want. And with these bigger yarns, especially if you leave them loose, you'll really see that texture more. If you pull them tight, snugged up to the weaving, you'll see them a little bit less. So again, we're just checking in that we're following our weaving pattern. I feel like I might have gotten a little bit off here. Yes, I did. That's all right. All right, so I'd like to show you just a couple more things. One that is super fun that I love to do is to add some color blocks. Now, this is called a dovetail join, where our colors meet. And I've already woven a little bit, so I'm going to grab some of this orange and show you how you do that. So I've picked 3 sections, but you can do 2 sections, and they can move around. Mine are all warped on the same, they all share one of the same warps. But you can go ahead and make different shapes. Let's see, I have this great one here. Let me just show you that real quick, where it kind of makes a half moon shape. And you can see that orange moves around on those warp threads. Whereas this one is it's really aligned along just one thread. That orange kind of moves around over a couple. The important thing when you're doing these is that dovetail join. And what that means, y'all, is that your threads are gonna share this warp thread where they turn. So you're gonna grab with the blue and come back this direction, grab with the orange and go back that direction. And what that does is you alternate that. If we look at my fingers, it's going to combine and keep you from having a big hole there. So this orange yarn that I have is much smaller than the blue. So I'm actually I'm gonna double this up so that they more closely match. So we're gonna start on the shared purple. And again, I'm doing over, under. Did I get it right? No. Until we get to their shared space. And then what you do here, so I'm gonna pull that snug. And then what we do here is find the last little loop. This is gonna be a lot easier with a needle. So as I approach that warp that they're sharing, I'm just gonna loosen those so you can see what's happening, get in there. So I'm going under, and then I'll come back to the other side, going under, over, until we get to the shared warp with the purple, and I'm gonna wrap there, and then come back, making sure I'm going under, over properly. So when I get to this blue, I'm gonna find the next little row, sneak in there and grab that. So what's happening, they're sharing this warp thread, and that's gonna keep you from having a giant hole. All right, so that is how you can make color block work. Very fun technique. If you'd like to learn more about that, again, we did make a more in-depth weaving workshop called Mug Rugs. Now, I do really like to get into the textures, so here's a fun one. This one is great, these loopies. Look how fun that is. So when you're weaving with something with really wild texture like this, you want to pay attention to those loops and make sure you're pulling them up to the front. Some of the wildest things that you can find at the craft store yarn bin, the clearance bin, which is where I got this. But look how fabulous that is for a weaving. Such cool texture. When I use something that's big and lumpy like this, I might follow the next row with something that is small. So I might go back to my original yarn here, my blue, and weave in just a small row or two to kind of tuck things in together. Another thing that is really awesome to do is to make tassels. So to do that, you're gonna cut some lengths of your yarn. I've got this fun thick yarn that I really enjoy using because you can unravel it and it becomes furry. So to make a tassel, we're gonna fold our yarn in half. So I have two loose ends and a looped over end. I'm gonna grab my looped over end, wrap it around one warp thread, so my loop is on my finger. I'm gonna grab those two tails and pull it through the loop. And now I have a tassel. What? So fun. So again, to do that, you're gonna loop your yarn so you have a loop and two ends. And you can put them anywhere. I'm gonna put that on the next one. So I'm gonna go under that warp thread. On one side I have my loop and the other side I have my loose ends. I'm gonna tuck those loose ends through that loop and then pull them snug. So this is another situation after I had all my tassels, I might come through and do another thin yarn to kind of tuck and tighten to make sure they stay in place. I do really love to trim them. Once I decide my weaving is done, I love to give them a haircut, make them all the same length. Cut them on a diagonal is really fun. This particular yarn is great because you can actually pull apart gently, pull apart those plies, kind of untwisting. And now I have curly fries. And you can either even further comb and tease that out so you get just fluffy fibers. So now I have tassels that look, different from each other. I really like doing that. It's fun. The other thing you can do with your tassels, instead of just choosing one real thick yarn, you can double things up like we did before. I could add some of this faux fur into that tassel. But you can see here we've got some of that going on. Here is the tassel unwound. Here it is uncombed. So you get a lot of different textures, which I find super fun. Now, the last thing I would like to show you is how to use the roving. So this is roving, and it's fleece that has not yet been spun into yarn. So it's pretty airy usually, real fluffy, but this is super fun to play with. If you have some that looks like this, what you're gonna do is just kind of gently pull a hunk of that apart till you get some that you want. And then I also like to kind of fluff and open it up. This to me is most appealing when it's kind of cloud-like. I might tug it this way too, till I get a shape that I really kind of like. And then to weave with it is a little bit different in that I'm gonna start from the center and weave in each direction rather than start on an end and go around. Because this is a little more delicate and I don't want to pull it apart. So I'm gonna start here, I'm gonna find my center and I'm gonna do that over-under trick. Now you can pull these so they're nice and flat. You can tuck them so they're nice and tight. I really like to play with them so they're kind of cloud puffy shapes, whatever you'd like to do. You can do multiple layers of this. You can do a half moon shape. You can do some that is wider and some that is thinner. And then to come in and finish the rest of this, I might use some of my color block technique to kind of deal with how this is thinner and this is thicker. And we can see some of that here. I have some fluffy little bits here in 2 different colors, and some of that white where it's pulled real high and some where it's pulled looser. I do try to keep what's on the back kind of tight so I'm not wasting the fluff. But yeah, the roving is real fun. All right, so once you're finished, you can pop that outer hoop back on. The other thing that is fun to do is to add some ribbon along the end. I just wrapped that. Use a little glue to hold it in place. If you want to remove your weaving from the hoop, like this little guy here, you'll want to make sure that you leave yourself, that you don't weave all the way up to the end of the hoop. You want to leave yourself some room, because when you cut it off, you're going to tie each of those warps together to keep your thread from just falling off. So you can see that here. Each of those warp pairs get tied. All right, so if you're like me at all, you will have quite the satisfaction in hanging this little honey on your wall. But also, if you're like me, you may have to find a place to hang it that is far away from your yarn-obsessed cat. Well, that's about all I've got for you today. We're super happy to be back in the groove of making our little movies, and we hope that you are finding some time to use your hands and to make stuff. From the Kindergarten for Grown Folks Clubhouse, this is Alice signing off. Thanks for watching, and we will see you soon.